Alright guys, hope you're all keeping safe and staying alert. A week or so ago I tackled topic 2 of the Reddit feedback post, which focused on reward, progression, loot quality and vendors for TU10. The general consensus from you guys was my video was on point, which is no surprise really because my opinion is in line with what the majority of this community has been talking about. But thank you all for your comments on that video. Today I want to focus on topic 1, titled NPC Balancing and General Content Difficulty. Hope you enjoy this one, and I encourage you all to leave your feedback below on this topic. Drop a like whilst you're down there, that would be much appreciated. And with that said, let's begin. So the topic is NPC balancing and general content difficulty. This is what the post says. The NPC balancing has been a topic since Title Update 8 dropped. We already had balance passes in TU 8.5 and TU9 that changed scaling, armor, health, damage and outliers like the minigun Warhound or the new support archetype of the Black Tusk. But now let's focus on more specific mechanics that cause difficulty spikes and frustrations and collect those. With this topic there is 6 questions and I'm going to give you my feedback, so I want to begin with that. It's worth noting that some of the recommended changes I was going to give are actually being addressed or have been addressed with TU 9.1, which dropped yesterday, and I will refer to that during my feedback. So question number 1 says NPC behavior and specific archetypes that cause difficulty spikes, question mark. Alright, so most of these have been addressed with TU 9.1 actually, but I want to talk about them anyway because some of them have been fixed before and become issues again, and that may well happen this time as well. NPC aggressiveness has been a real problem since Warlords of New York, even before that actually, and it has been addressed numerous times I believe. This was never an issue with the Division from my memory, so I'm not quite sure why this keeps creeping up after every big update, but it feels like it's just one of those never-ending problems. It does appear to have been slightly tuned down right now with TU 9.1, which is good, but I do need to test it a bit more because I've seen reports of people saying it doesn't feel that much different. NPC grenade accuracy has been a big problem for some time, with even the red bar NPCs, you know, the grunts of the mob essentially, being able to throw a pinpoint grenade from ranges that even a marksman rifle cannot reach. I can report the changes that have been made are good changes. The only thing I'd like to add to this is that a lot of these grenades are thrown or shot from out of sight and then they hit you, and I don't think that should be a thing, specifically grenade launchers. I think the NPC should have line of sight in order to make that shot. Next up is NPC sprint speed. I think this is a problem. I'm not too sure if this was addressed specifically with TU 9.1. I think there were changes that were made to NPCs starting to cover depending on the status effect that they received, but actual NPC speed I just feel is way overtuned still, and it needs to be toned down to a more reasonable pace. I believe this was addressed with TU 8, maybe even before that, but I don't know, I still feel as though NPCs run far too fast. NPC overheal, it is a problem, but this has been addressed with TU 9.1, and the same for NPC medkits, which will no longer fully heal an NPC, with each new medkit granting diminishing return, so that's good. NPC fire damage and flamethrower range was extremely overtuned, but these have been addressed with TU 9.1. The flamethrower range, I believe, is still slightly probable, maybe, but fire damage actually appears to have been quashed significantly and actually is more in line with what poison damage does, and I'm very happy with where fire damage is currently. NPC archetypes is something I have very little knowledge on, I'll be honest guys, even with my playtime, because I honestly don't pay that much attention to the NPCs and the different archetypes and what they're doing. We know the devs have nerfed the NPC drone damage and increased the cooldown, which by the way is way better now, but I have seen reports of some instances where they continuously spam drones, but that might just be a bug rather than an actual change. They have nerfed the RC card damage and cooldown, but again I've seen reports of this still being an issue, especially the tracking range. From my experience, the explosion damage is still quite significant, but the actual fire damage and status effect following that has been significantly diminished, and I think that was one of the main issues with it. So I'm happy with where it is, but the tracking range is still possibly something they need to look at. Your input on specific archetypes that cause difficulty spikes would be much appreciated below. Oh, they have nerfed the red bar SMG damage and nerfed blind fire as well, which is really good news, and that appears to have taken effect and actually looks pretty good. So let's move on. Next question: specific differences between solo and group play that could be addressed. Now, my knowledge to answer this question purely stems from a solo player experience, as I very rarely play in a group. Actually, the last time I played in a group really was probably either the raid or the one and only time I tried legendary, and we'll get into that. But so I'm quite ill-informed to actually make any good commentary on group play, but on solo I can. Firstly, legendary missions, they're just impossible as a solo player. Why? Well, there's numerous factors. One of the main reasons is because you cannot have, a great CC build and then do enough damage to actually clear the content. Legendary missions require at least one CC most of the time, and one other type of build to clear due to a lot of the outliers being fixed with TU 9.1, but predominantly due to the amount of damage NPCs do to you, the amount of damage they can take, and the fact that NPCs are programmed to push you out of cover in a cover-based shooter. Even if you could have a great CC and damage hybrid, chances are you're not going to have enough ammo to actually clear each stage, although I have seen some really nice skill builds from TU 9.1 that may work for legendary. More on that soon, hopefully. Ammo economy is brutal as a solo player as the difficulty increases, even using something like an M1A. As a solo player, cover feels almost useless. All the aggro is drawn to you because you're not with a group, it's not being drawn everywhere else, it's just to you. And with that comes all the skills NPCs have at their disposal, each one forcing you out of cover, and then you're into one-shot territory. There's no mistake that generally playing as a group will always be easier than playing solo, and I can accept that, especially in more difficult content. But legendary, it's completely out of question for solo players, which is disappointing. NPC scaling needs to be adjusted, and more importantly, I think the variety and amount of NPCs needs to be looked at for this difficulty as a solo player. Another issue is loot. As a solo player, loot is far less frequent than running as a group, because you can, as a group, you can also share loot around, which may force players to then try and find a group. But the downside of being in a group is the vastly increased NPC tankiness. So you have a choice: less loot but more realistic as a solo player, NPC armor, or more loot with very unrealistic armor in a group. And this should not be a choice people should have to make. Both solo and groups should be balanced. So the decision is, do I just want to play solo today, or do I want to play in a group? That's it. There should be no other determining factors. Moving on to the next question, which says specific missions, situations that you noted are very difficult, in higher difficulties, even after the TU9 changes. Alright, so one of these situations that immediately popped into my mind as I was writing the script for this video is control points. Why? Well, it's because I play a lot of control points. Actually, most of my time is spent playing control points. And a huge proportion of that time I spend is me sat in cover, fairly far away from those control points. And I always somehow get absolutely swamped from behind by waves and waves of elites from a resource convoy. These are convoys that do not show up on the map, but appear behind me as I sit in cover in fear of moving out of cover. This is annoying enough, but on top of that, because you are forced to clear the resource convoy before continuing to take the control point unless you want to just get buried, their completion turns the control point heroic. Now for me, heroic control points are not that much difficult, or more difficult than challenging. They're just very under rewarding for the amount of time that you're actually investing into that control point compared to challenging. But for some people, clearing that resource convoy will mean they have to find a new control point because they just don't have the tools to complete the control point on heroic. I'd like to see maybe some sort of change here. I don't want to lose the spirit of the world, this alive world, but sometimes it goes as far as you've got a resource convoy coming over here, you've just got random NPCs as well, and it just becomes a huge war zone. And sometimes it's fine. I don't mind having the odd occasion, but it feels like 75% of the time I'm fighting 3 different activities all at once, and it can become a little bit frustrating when that happens, especially when you're in cover and they just spawn behind you. So I'd like to see some changes made there. I don't know what, because I wouldn't like to lose the world, but I think something needs to change there. Next up, and rogue encounters question. Are the rogue agents better now with TU9 balance pass? Now, I've only come across one rogue encounter since TU9, and it did feel more manageable, but to be honest, what's the point of them is the question that I've got. You know, they invade your mission or invade your world with unlimited skills, no cooldowns, and they make you as a player feel unbelievably weak. And yet, if you do overcome the challenge they present, your rewards are a little bit of experience and then just really poor loot. And that's if you're one of the lucky ones who actually got loot. At first, rogue agents were this brand new shiny thing. You know, they were like hunter encounters, were in the underground game mode. But that soon wore off with the rogues because there's no incentive. They are probably the worst example of time invested in difficulty versus reward in the game, or best example. I'm not sure which one that would be. I'd rather stand in the open, get shredded in 2 seconds whilst being blinded and simultaneously corroding into the floor than fight these guys, because it will be over a lot quicker and I'm going to get the same reward, which is nothing. Now, if the devs were to provide a very high chance at a max rolled item, high chance of an exotic, etc. to these encounters, maybe throw a new type of extremely rare loot behind them, I think I would take them a lot more seriously. There should be no concern over people getting all the gear too soon as well with this, because rogue encounters, they cannot be farmed, because they're just, you know, random instances. So please, Massive, if you want us to actually interact with this particular piece of content, if you want to make it fun, you've got to make it rewarding for the player. Moving on, and this next question I believe is targeted at replayability. It says, what tactical mechanics could be added to keep things challenging in a different way? Now, I recently watched a video by Lieutenant Buzz Lightbeer, another Division content creator that I'd highly recommend you guys go watch. He does some fantastic content where he tackled these questions like I am right now. Now, I really wanted to mention that for this particular question because he came up with some fantastic ideas which I want to reiterate. But first, I think the devs need to not kid themselves here. Quite frankly, the design choices when it comes to replayability, in my opinion, are a far cry from what the Division offers. The missions at first, they're fun, but after running them 10,000 times, they've become very boring. I'd have a full fanboy outcry if the devs decided to bring back survival, underground resistance, with a fresh lick of paint and some new changes, but we know this is very unlikely, hence why this question exists and not one that asks about game modes we'd like to see. With that said, some of the things Lieutenant Lightbeer mentioned sounded interesting to me, some of which have been asked of the devs for some time. The sandstorms, for example, could be used to great effect within activities and missions. The sandstorm would be the perfect weather for a new survival game mode, and it feels like it's very underutilized in the game right now. Having the mission start and end point reversed would be an interesting way to play each mission from another perspective. Using the green and orange gas from the raid in missions to provide another mechanic and layer of difficulty would again be interesting. I guess my major concern is that no matter what mechanic they implement, players are quickly going to become bored unless those mechanics are substantial. What the Division 2 needs is not new mechanics in my opinion, but they need new game modes, clear and simple. Give us a wave-based mode like Resistance, which offered hundreds and hundreds of hours of replayability. I think the community is crying out for this stuff, and what I will say on a personal note is that when I get bored of doing PvE stuff, and I'll give you Destiny as an example, when I get bored of the PvE grind, which is what is happening with the Division 2 unfortunately, what do? Well, I play PvP, and because the Division 2 PvP is pretty terrible right now, I cannot do that. And actually a lot of the time why I play PvE is so that I can get gear and builds for PvP, and that applies to games like Destiny and other looters out there. So PvP needs to be addressed as soon as possible. I know that's going off topic, but yeah, of course, any new mechanics we can add to these missions is always going to be a good thing, but I really feel as though we need to move towards game modes rather than new mechanics. Last question, guys. Are there legendary difficulty specific changes that you would like to see? Now, like I've said before, I play solo. I attempted legendary once a while ago with one other person, I believe it was Marker Blades, and it didn't go well at all. This was actually before players had realised how strong CC builds were, but even with that knowledge today, I see no reason to actually play legendary aside from the achievement of actually doing it. But that doesn't incentivize me as a player. The Bighorn exotic appears to be very underwhelming, and it's also not guaranteed. Not just not guaranteed, but if an exotic does drop within legendary, it might be another exotic instead of the Bighorn. I think the Bighorn should be a guaranteed exotic drop for legendary completion. And sure, you can keep other exotics in the loot pool, but they should drop on top of the guaranteed Bighorn, not replace it. Aside from that, I have no other suggestions because I simply have not played it to make a comment. I did check Reddit to see what other people have said, and the vast majority said they hadn't played it. That's expected because it is the hardest content in the game, but like I've said, the time invested for legendaries versus the rewards is laughable, and that alone will certainly disincentivize anyone to invest the time required to even attempt this difficulty. Here's hoping that TU10 NPC Global Balancing can make changes that will really allow solo players the opportunity to play Legendary. And again, I'd also like to see some changes made to the loot within Legendary. And I believe if they do that, it would certainly incentivize me as a solo player to get in there and at least attempt to try and do Legendary on my own. That's it for today's video though, guys. Thanks very much for all of your support. As always, you guys are the best. Hope you all have a fantastic weekend. I will be spending the evening in my hot tub with my wife, with a busy weekend ahead, or painting the fence, building our pergola and the rest. It should be fun. I'll see you all next week. Epic out.